Hi, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to a special edition of Onwards and Upwards. Not in our usual time slot on a Friday. Today is Monday in beautiful California. And my name is Tanya Friedman, the CEO of Kinetics USA, and I am your host today. Our topic today is retrogression. This is a topic that is very scary for many healthcare workers coming to the United States. I was just in the Philippines recently. I just got back last night, and I know that many people in the Philippines, as well as all over the world, are very nervous and very panicked by the word retrogression and what it means. So today I am joined by our expert legal panel who will be answering your questions about retrogression. What does that mean for you? How long do they think it's going to last? What does it mean if you are at the I-140 filing stage? What does it mean if you're at the NVC stage? What does it mean if you are at the consulate? There are a lot of questions already coming into the chat, so I'm going to get started right away and bring in our expert legal panel, and they are going to be answering your questions. My desk is full of questions, and we're going to try and get through as many questions as we can right away. I'm also joined by Dr. Paul from LaFora, who will be also sharing questions from the LaFora Forum. Our friends at the LaFora Forum have many questions that are coming in as well. So both Paul and I will be asking your questions of the expert legal panel, and I'm going to get started right away. Just one quick shout out before I do that. I want to wish Mike Hammond a very happy belated birthday.
Thank you, Tanya. I look a lot older, more wiser.
Very distinguished, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start off by just welcoming Mike Hammond, Chris Musello, and Denise Gavica Perez, who need no introduction, as well as Dr. Nurse Paul from the Fora, who are joining us today. Nurse Paul, I think if you want to put yourself on mute if you're not speaking, because there seems to be a little bit of noise interference. So let's start off with Mike. Mike, do you want to go ahead and explain to everybody what happened last week?
Yeah, so the Department of State released the May Visa Bulletin, and the dates for the Philippines and for EB3 rest of the world, as well as Mexico, moved from current, which was essentially no line, no queue, back to June 1st, 2022. So they moved back approximately 11 months from where we will sit as of May 1st. And what this means is that depending on where you're at in the case that I'm sure we're going to get to here in a little bit, your case cannot be completed, cannot go through certain process unless your priority date, your spot in the queue, precedes June 1st, 2022. So that is the short answer.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And before we get into everybody's questions, I would like us to just explain a little bit more about what the Visa Bulletin is all about. This is a topic that's very confusing for many healthcare workers around the world. Chris, do you want to explain what the Visa Bulletin, how it actually works?
Right. So the Visa Bulletin comes out monthly, usually around the middle of the month for the next month. So we saw last week the Visa Bulletin came out, I guess it was Thursday, April 13th. And so first, I think, takeaway, Tanya, is that actually it's the May Visa Bulletin. And so everything we're going to be talking about here actually does not take effect until May 1st. And so from now, April 17th, for about the next 2 weeks, we're actually working under the April Visa Bulletin, which was released about 30 days ago in the middle of March. And what the Visa Bulletin is the U.S. government is allowed, or USCIS and the State Department are allowed 140,000 employment-based visas each year. And if they receive more than 140,000 visa applications, the State Department is forced to retrogress the number of visas such that, and I'm not going to get into the entirety of the calculation, but the key thing is that they're allocated through a U.S. statute, both by EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4, and EB5, and then they're also allocated by the country of birth of the applicant. And so the dates that we see come up are the State Department's way over the subsequent month and ideally future months to sort of stagger these visas so that ideally the 140,000th visa is used in September. Why September? Because the U.S. fiscal year runs from October to September. So ideally, they're producing or approving something like 12,000 visas in October and November and December, all the way to September when the 140,000th visa is issued. If they move too fast, then the 140,000th visa may be issued in June or July or August. If they move too slow, which happened a little bit under COVID, then actually they get to September 30th and they have not used 140,000 visas. And again, without getting too technical, the law tells us what happens with any of that excess.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So that gives us clarification of what the visa bulletin actually is. It's a very confusing topic, but basically it's saying that the numbers have run out, right? Or the numbers are oversubscribed.
They're expected to run out, I think, is the best way to think about it.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think it's important to know that they haven't run out, which is why the visa bulletin came out, for instance, with the Philippine and or all other EB3 of June 1st, 22. So we know they haven't run out because we know, I'm sure the rest of the panelists know as well, a number of our clients who have priority dates from May 22 and earlier. And so that's how we know they haven't run out. But what we do know is that the government expects them to run out. And so it's only allowing those older cases to continue to move through the system.
Okay, so this is why Onwards and Upwards is such a great tool for many nurses to learn the truth about retrogression, and knowledge is power, everybody. So we're really so grateful to the legal expert panel for clarifying that it's expected to run out. Denise, can you maybe share with the viewers, and I think we have lots of viewers that are joining us from all around the world, what do you think is your prediction as to when it might become current? This is a question we're getting from the chat. You're on mute, Denise.
Thank you, Tanya. It's very difficult to predict. I think everyone on the panel will agree. It's difficult to predict when the immigrant visas will become available again. But basically, the goal is to try to push the cases that are already in the queue as quickly as possible during the month of April, since there's still immigrant visas available this month. But as far as determining when, historically, for example, I believe it was in 2020, the immigrant visas became available because a lot of the family, in addition to the 140,000 that we already had, a lot of the family immigrant visas were transferred into the employment. So we've had wonderful months up until now. So what will happen is the fiscal year, as Chris mentioned, starts October 1st. And we just basically have to track the trend and get a better idea as to how many immigrant visas are being requested or have been requested. But it's very hard to predict, Tanya. So I apologize for not having that information, but I think with all the months to come, we will keep track of it. And when we see that the light is at the end of the tunnel, and the light will be at the end of the tunnel at some time, we will let everyone know. Just don't lose hope. This has happened in the past, and we have survived the visa retrogression, and we will get back on track. Unfortunately, again, I can't predict exactly when, though.
Okay, and I think that's fair because nobody really knows 100% of when it's going to get back on track. But as Denise says, we really need to make sure that we don't lose hope. I think that this retrogression, I think when people hear the word retrogression, it just becomes so terrifying because, we had such a long retrogression many years ago. Mike, how is this retrogression maybe different to what people experienced in 2008, 2009, 2010, that kind of time frame, in your opinion?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, in 2008, 2009, not only did we see retrogression, but we also saw economic conditions such that the demand shrunk, which meant that there was little appetite for any legislative corrective relief that would provide some relief. The reality is that we have been living off of the, I guess, let's call it the only maybe positive benefit of COVID over the last 3 years, and that we have had in the employment category a significant influx of immigrant visas. Without that, we would have seen this type of retrogression, several years ago. So the reality is their demand simply exceeds the supply. And when the demand exceeds the supply, then there is retrogression. I don't think we're going to get to current again. I think that we have to understand that as long as the demand is at the level of supply or higher, then we're going to continue to have a line form. And the question is simply, how long is the line? And if the line is as it is now in the 10 to 12 month mark, then we're going to see, for candidates who are overseas, little practical effect, because your path forward in the line is going to move along with the process of your case. So they run parallel. When the line gets to, say, 18 months or so, then we start to see a much larger impact. For people who are here in the U.S., the answers are different, but for people overseas, I think the magic is in that under 18 months versus, over 18 months. At least that's my perception.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Mike. And I think it's worthwhile just to mention that there was a study that came out from Becker's Hospital Review that 800,000 more nurses plans to exit the US workforce by 2027. So the demand in the United States is so much higher right now than it ever was in the last retrogression. And as Mike said, there could very well be an appetite for some legislation change, because there really has never been more demand for nurses in the United States than what we're seeing right now. Dr. Nurse Paul, do you want to comment on that, of the demand that you're seeing in the United States right now as a nurse here in the US?
Yeah, for sure. That's a real thing. I've worked in the bedside for a bit, 6 years total. And every single day, like I said in my past shows, every single day that I come in for work, there's not a day that we're not short-staffed in the entire hospital. So there's really a need. More people are getting sick. The population is aging. We certainly need a lot of nurses. And the pandemic changed the landscape. A lot of nurses are leaving the bedside. So the demand is there.
Yeah, the demand is definitely there. And I can definitely say, from the Kinetics USA perspective, Kinetics USA are now part of AMN Healthcare, as well as O'Grady Payton, which is our sister company, who have been bringing in international nurses for many, many years. Thousands of nurses have come through us to the United States. And the demand is what I would say explosive. So there really is a massive demand right now. In terms of the different phases of the green card, we have a graphic with the 5 stages of a consular green card. Chris, do you want to maybe just take us through these 5 stages and just explain, in terms of the kind of the theory side, what would happen at each stage of the green card? Now that retrogression is here.
Sure. So the pre-filing stage, there's a few components to pre-filing, and it's best to think of them as there's some things that the employer, the health system, has to do, or the staffing company has to do, and there's things that the nurse herself or himself has to do. From the employer side, in the broadest sense, what they have to do is they have to file with the U.S. Department of Labor in order to confirm what the prevailing wage is for a nurse in that metropolitan area. And then the employer has to give notice to U.S. workers about what that wage is. So that's the pre-filing on the employer side. On the employee side, I think most of the nurses know this, but it's things like passing your NCLEX exam primarily, obviously graduating from a nursing school, et cetera. The second step, which is filing the immigrant petition, is often called the I-140 stage. And so just like in stage 1 and stage 2, none of this changes with retrogression. In fact, it is the filing of that I-140 stage that grants you your priority date. And so any nurse whose I-140 was filed before June 1st, 2022, they today are able to continue through to stages 3, 4, and 5. Maybe we can put that slide back on again and I can talk about, okay, so the third one is the National Visa Center. So this is where your case will freeze or stay until your priority date is current. Again, if you're before June 1st, 2022, you'll move forward to a National Visa Center. If you're after June 1st, you will sit there until such time as your case becomes current, which is to say your priority date exceeds the date on the visa bulletin. And then steps, obviously, with the National Visa Center, you move through the National Visa Center once you're current. The National Visa Center then works with the embassy in order to make sure that there's an immigrant visa number available for you. The embassy or consulate then in stage 4 sets your interview, and then at the end of the interview, you're normally given a temporary green card, and you're able to work with Kinetics in order to schedule a flight into the United States, and then your permanent green card comes, usually a few weeks after you land to the United States, but of course you are a permanent resident. Really, once you get through the airport and your passport is stamped with the temporary visa stamp.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So we have a lot of questions in the chat, and Dr. Nussbaum, I know you have some questions as well from the Lafora forum. So we're going to now take as many questions as we can. So the first one is from Hussein: which stage will be affected by the retrogression in the EB3 route? So those steps that Chris has just taken us through, Denise, which stages are affected?
So the stages that are affected are any of you who are at the National Visa Center stage of the process or before. So whether you're at the I-140 stage, where the I-140 is either pending or approved, or you're at the National Visa Center stage of the process, you will be affected by the retrogression. Also, for those of you who have interviews after April, you will also be affected by the retrogression until your priority date becomes current on the visa bulletin.
Okay, thank you. So Diane is asking, I have a priority date of June 30th, 2021. Mike, what advice do you have for Diane?
Since her priority date is prior than the priority date for May, she has no effect whatsoever on her.
Okay, so congrats, Diane. You are one of the lucky ones and are not affected by the latest retrogression. Leanna is asking, I just passed my NCLEX and I'll be taking my IELTS academic in May. Will it be advisable to proceed or just reschedule it to prevent it from expiring, Chris?
Right. So yes, unquestionably, you want to take your NCLEX. You want to get into the processing queue. A few minutes earlier when we were talking, people were asking, what does the future hold? And the answer, of course, is no one knows. But we do know one thing, which is if you don't get your spot in the queue, which is to say, if you don't file your I-140, then you can never be current. And the only way you can file your I-140 is to have passed your NCLEX. So from that vantage point, there's really nothing that should be changed. In fact, arguably, if anything, it's more critical to pass your NCLEX so that you can get into that processing queue.
Okay. And this is a question that I got like many times over the last few hours is, can I still be filed? So the answer is yes, correct? You can still file an I-140 because there's some misconception that you cannot file an I-140 with retrogression.
Right. In fact, not only can you still file an I-140, that is the only way to get into the queue.
Okay, so Leanna, you got to find an employer. Please apply to Kinetics USA. We have thousands of open positions at AMN. We actually have over 6,000 open positions right now. So apply, and we would be happy to help you and get you filed. Dr. Nurse Paul, do you want to maybe share one of the questions that you're getting, one of the common questions you're getting from the forum?
Yes. So for those that have interview dates on May or June and their priority dates is beyond the 1st of June 2022, so they're going to be affected, should they proceed to medical? What happened to their medical? What happened to their visa screen? Their requirements, are they going to be affected?
And I think, Denise, if you want to maybe take that question about the medicals.
So it's unpredictable when the party dates will become current again. However, I always tell my clients to take all of the steps that are necessary, even if the medicals expire, even if their visa screen expire. It's best to have everything ready so that if the party dates become current again, you don't have to scramble and try to get your medicals completed. My recommendation is take all of the necessary steps even when there's retrogression, because we don't know when it will be lifted, and you want to be ready. So yes, I would go forward with my medicals.
Okay, and do you want to maybe just give some clarity, Denise, of how long the medicals are valid for?
Thank you, Tanya, for that. I don't recall how long they're valid for, but I think if someone else on the panel can help me with this one, because I don't recall how long the medicals are valid for.
I have absolutely no idea whatsoever.
I think the medicals are valid for 6 months from the time it was done.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Thank you. We never get to the point that they expire.
Combined effort here on this question.
Yeah, I've seen all types of retrogression in the last 15 years, so yep, very familiar about it.
And this is a very common question. I was actually in the Philippines last week and sat with one of our nurses. Her name was Michelle, and she had come up from Mindanao to have her medicals. Her priority date was July 6th, which is my birthday. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hope that's a lucky date for you. But as Denise says, we really don't know how things are going to evolve. So really, you're going to have to go ahead. And if they do expire, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to do them again. Mike Sager is asking, I'm from India and I am an RN looking for sponsorship. Vision is to asking about Indian nurses. Can you comment maybe on the Indian nurse situation as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing that has changed with Indian RN nurses. The dates for India EB3 is back in 2012, which is better than it has been, but it's still too far away to be viable. The legislation that's being talked about would provide some relief, if it exempts RNs in total, well, then of course there would be a pathway for Indian RNs. However, if it simply moves things around on the board, it may not. But for right now, no positive news yet. The only chance would be from some legislative relief. There's too many other Indian workers who are already in the U.S. and already in the queue to provide any natural kind of relief.
Thank you, Mike. And there was a little bit of good news for Chinese-born healthcare nurses, correct, Chris?
Yes, yeah, no, the Chinese did move ahead a little bit. The Chinese EB2 is all the way up to June of 2019, and the EB3 is April of 2019. So that's about a 4-year retrogression, which for China EB3, I'm going a bit off memory here, but that's got to be one of the more favorable processing times that I've seen in China EB3 in a long time.
Okay, so a little bit of positive light for Chinese-born nurses. Chanchala is asking, my priority date is June 23rd. Denise, any advice? You're on mute, Denise. Denise, you're on mute.
Thank you, Tom. I mute so you don't hear the background, the air. Even though your party date is June of 2020, did you say 2023 or 2022?
23rd
I think she said
of
June 23rd, 2022. So
June
she's
23rd.
only 3 weeks short.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we should find, I mean, the main question is she already scheduled for her interview in the month of April? So if she's scheduled for her interview in the month of April, if she's not, then she's unfortunately affected by the retrogression.
So just a little bit of a longer wait. Kalas from Jamaica, I'm currently awaiting a visa interview date. My priority date is September 6th, 2022. Given the retrogression, what does this mean for me, Mike? Chris, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it probably means that you're not getting a visa interview until the fourth quarter of this year, sometime after October. So, I think if I were thinking about this, from a timing perspective, it seems unlikely to me that we are going to see an EB3 Philippine or EB3 rest of world progression between now and the end of the U.S. fiscal year, which is to say, I don't think it's going to be any better than June 1st, 2022 in the June, July, August, or September visa bulletins. I could be wrong. Maybe it will move ahead a month or two. I doubt I'm wrong, but I could be. In fact, I think what's much more likely is in one of those 4 future visa bulletins that the visa bulletin actually moves back from June 1st, 2022 and moves back to, I don't know, January 1st, 2022. I wouldn't get too concerned about that. That's just simply, as I mentioned earlier, the June 2022 date means that the U.S. government has a lot of visas previous to June of 2022 that they are trying to work through. If it retrogresses further back, it just simply means that they worked through those visas. I do think come October, which is when the new fiscal year is, we will see some progression in that date. How far is a bit of an open question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So that gives us some idea of what to expect. Ardi has a question, watching from Memphis, Tennessee. How does retrogression affect H-1 visa holders awaiting employers to start the EB3 process? Denise?
So if the applicant is physically in the United States with an H-1B, they can continue working indefinitely. They can renew their H-1B indefinitely while if their immigrant visa case has already been if the I-140 has already been approved. And retrogression impacts them as well because there are no immigrant visas available for them to reach the final point of their permanent residence process and receive a green card, but at least they can continue working in the United States on that H-1B and renewing it until their party date becomes current.
Okay, so they will still be in valid visa status then?
Correct, as long as the employer continues with the H-1B petition.
Okay. All right. So there you go, Ardi. Dr. Nurse Paul, do you want to maybe give us one of the other questions that you're seeing from the fora right now?
Yes. So there's also one question here right now, but same question I'm going to ask that I got was 221G. So their priority date is after June 1st, but they have 221G and now we're faster. What's going to happen to those 221Gs?
Chris, do you want to take that question?
Yes, so if their priority date, Dr. Nurse Paul, is after June 1st, unless they get their 221G remedied in the next week or two before May 1st, then they are not going to get their visa probably in the next 4 months for the reasons I mentioned a minute or two ago. Having said that, they should unquestionably, to some degree, Tanya, and this I think is going to be a constant theme. On one hand, this retrogression is enormously important and it's frustrating and it may change people's life plans. So for instance, if you were hoping to get your visa appointment this summer, now you may not get it until the end of this year or into next year, into 2024. So from that standpoint, I think it's important in terms of your life planning. From another standpoint, absolutely nothing changes. You still need to take the NCLEX. You still need to get your English fluency. You still need to pass your English testing exam. You need to get the visa screen. If you get a 221G, you need to timely respond to that. None of that changes. There's no reason for any of that, for anyone to take any action that they would not otherwise take. I think the only thing is you want to set your mindset to say, maybe instead of coming in 6 months, I'm going to come in about a year. And to constantly monitor that and refine that date when you might get your visa appointment. But in terms of steps you have to take, nothing changes. If anything, this puts a slight bit of more pressure on, because you are going to want to make sure that on the date when your date becomes current, you're eligible to move through the process, through the NVC process and through the embassy, so that if dates retrogress back, you're not sort of stuck like this 221G person is. If this 221G person, I don't know who they are, but if they received their 221G in January, well, then they really should have made a priority of responding to it in January or February, and they probably would have their visa already. So again, in my mind, the key thing is nothing changes from the actions one has to take. If anything, this puts a slight bit more pressure on. The only thing is a mindset change as to when I will be able to actually enter the United States. And it's not going to be 10 years. It's going to be 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, I think.
Okay. I love that you said that, Chris, because I think that is really, from my side, the biggest takeaway that we really want to share with the nurses that are watching right now, the nurses, med techs, etc., that are watching right now, is that the process is the same. Nothing changes in the process. If you need to take the English exam, take the English exam. If you are working on your NCLEX and need to be filed, take your NCLEX, pass your NCLEX, so that you can make sure that you are in the queue and in the line for a green card. Nothing changes. It just means that it makes life a little bit more complicated, unfortunately, for many people, because maybe you were planning to resign at a certain time. Maybe you were planning your medicals at a certain time. They might expire. That can have financial implications for you. So unfortunately, it does make things a little bit more complicated and a little bit more frustrating, because it's already a frustrating process. So it can make it more frustrating, but really adjusting your mindset is the biggest issue. And also not to panic. People hear the word retrogression and it makes everyone's shaking. I mean, the fever pitch in the Philippines when I was there last week was like everyone is like, Dr. Paul's nodding his head. Everyone is like, just freaking out. So I think the message is just to be calm, carry on with the process, and just know this is going to be a delay, and hopefully nothing more than that. Frasil is asking, I'm a Canadian citizen. Can I apply for the TN visa while waiting for my EB3? Denise?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those of you who are Canadian, permanent residents of Canada, apply for the citizenship so that you can qualify for the TN. It is the easiest way of entering the United States and working with an employer. For those of you who are not familiar with the TN, it's a visa classification that allows non-immigrant workers from Canada and Mexico to enter the United States and work as a non-immigrant worker. Canadians simply have to cross the border with a letter from the employer, their credentials, evidence that the company exists, that they've been made an offer, and their TN is automatically activated as soon as they arrive to the United States. And then for those that are Mexican nationals, they go to the U.S. consulate, request their TN visa, and enter the U.S. And then at that time, they can start working on the TN. So I highly encourage, for those of you who are Canadian citizens, to apply for the TN.
Thank you. So And Francine, I would definitely encourage you to look at the Kinetics USA website, as well as our YouTube channel and our social media. We have a whole show on the TN visa. What are the steps that are required? We have a guidebook on the TN visa. So if you or anyone is qualified to obtain a TN visa, then I highly encourage you to look at that. And that can give you a lot of information about how that process works. Marinor is asking, good day. I'd like to ask if I'm already in civil documents, can I proceed to DQ even with retrogression, Mike?
No. The NVC stage is, I think it was stage 3 on the chart you had up there earlier, Tanya, is where the hold happens. So if you are not current or close to being current, they don't expect you to be current, then you will not move through at the NVC process. So wherever you're at now is where you're going to kind of sit. But that,
so basically what happened,
that doesn't mean that you don't respond and provide whatever information they're asking for. You still do that so that you've done everything you can do. So when that is released, that they will move you to the next stage.
Okay. And I think the main message here really is those things that are out of your control, like the government processing time is out of your control. Those things that are in your control, Marinor, like providing the civil documents, those are the things that you continue to do. Dr. Nurse Paul, do you want to maybe go ahead and ask another question that you're seeing in the fora?
Yes. Another question is, what happens to those follow to join which have priority dates that are beyond the June 1st, 2022 retrogression date?
Chris, do you want to maybe take that question?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And the unfortunate reality is they will not get a visa if they're follow to join after June of 22 until such time as the priority date becomes current. So again, they do have 2 weeks, so maybe they get something in the next 2 weeks. But outside of that, they will, so if their priority date is, I don't know, September 1st, 2022, they will need to wait until a visa bulletin is produced that has a date later than September 1st, 2022.
Okay, so that can be a little difficult for families where they were waiting for family members to join them, but unfortunately, this is something that would be out of our control. Rowan is asking, I filed last February this year, but with priority date in my notice of action from my previous petitioner dated 2003. What would be my scenario, Denise?
Well, that falls under the concept of preserved party date. If your party date is before June of 2022 in that prior filing, then you would still be current. You can preserve that party date, and it's a date prior to June of 2022. So you would still be eligible for an immigrant visa.
So Rowan would basically just go through the normal process, right, Denise?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No
delays there.
I wanted to mention, sorry, I was looking at the dates back in September of 2019, and the visas back then retrogressed to July of 2016, and October, they were back in 2017. So while it's terrible to retrogress, at least we're not as bad as back in 2019. So 2016 versus 2022 is not.
Definitely also not as bad as during my time, where it was retrogressed 2002 and it was the year 2012.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. So that's, I think, important for everybody just to kind of keep in perspective. Maricel is saying, I have my interview date already, but my PD is September 2022. Mike, what's going to happen for Maricel?
Well, hopefully for Maricel, if she's already had her interview date and there's not a 221G, she can be have her visa issued in the next 2 weeks. If not, she will be waiting until October at the earliest. In my opinion, I agree with Chris that the dates are not going to move forward between now and then. So it'd be October before she would expect to be stamped. The fact you've had an interview does not lock your date in. It's only the visa issuance that actually locks you in.
Yeah, and that's where we've actually seen some of the consulates have actually cancelled those interview dates. So, Marisol, you know, if that happens, it will probably be October going forward. UL Jwin is asking, how early could the retrogression end? What have the previous trends Kinetics USA seen regarding retrogression? Could it end as early as June of this year? Chris, I know you've given your prediction. Do you
Yeah.
think that
So a
this would
couple of
be
things.
possible?
One, no, it will not end by June of this year. I feel confident in saying that. Two, in my mind, the retrogression is probably never going to end. That's not as dire as it sounds. But there may always be, well, there's currently what, a 9-month retrogression. It may expand to a year. It may expand to a year and a quarter. I doubt it'll ever get up to where the Chinese and Indian dates are. But again, the key thing is don't expect it to move forward. Expect to add, a few months onto it. Monitor it regularly. But other than that, just keep doing the important things, which is taking your NCLEX and passing TOEFL and all of these things. But it's not going to end. The only way it would end is if international workers stopped wanting to come to America, which probably isn't going to happen. Mike said something earlier which is worth repeating, which is that this retrogression that we're seeing now, we probably would have seen 2 or 3 years ago before COVID.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And the other reason that it might end or change, Chris, is if there's some legislation change, correct?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. If there's a legislative change, and there are some things that are being worked on, but I don't want to under-promise anything yet. We're still not finished with the exact strategy, and there may be more than one strategy. Hopefully, we'll have something in the next 60 days or so to announce. But that would just be the announcement of the legislative process that we're going to hope to get approved. Getting that approved is not going to be easy, unfortunately.
Yeah. So at this stage, we are where we are, and we're just going to be monitoring it regularly, giving regular updates. And as Chris said, it's really just a matter of changing your mindset that there's going to be some delays. Dr. Nurse Paul, do you want to share one of the other questions from the fora?
Yes, one last question from me. Cross-chargeability. The spouse is from UK, or now I'm a UK citizen. What's going to happen to me?
Denise?
So you're still subject to retrogression because again, it's for the rest of the world. So even if you're from India or China or one of the countries that's usually subject to the retrogression, it really at this point cross-chargeability does not matter. But you want to keep an eye on the visa bulletins that are to come and see if things will improve under all chargeability areas. That's where all the other countries fall. But for now, even if you have a UK nationality, you're subject to the retrogression.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Nanette is asking an interesting question about filing for the I-140, and would we still file premium processing? Mike, what is your recommendation? Should an employer still file premium processing when filing a new case for an I-140 filing?
Yeah, I think for right now, I would still continue to recommend premium processing because we have an under 1 year kind of queue. However, as that queue gets longer, then I think that answer is going to change. And I think premium processing is not going to be as relevant. And I think the variables there are not only how long the line is, but how long regular processing at the I-140 stage is. Because keep in mind that your priority date is established based upon the file date, not upon the approval date. So if you get filed today, today's your priority date, April 17th. The fact that you're not approved for 6 months or 3 weeks is irrelevant to the establishment of the priority date. So as long as the processing of the I-140 is within the time frame of retrogression, then you don't lose anything by not filing as premium. So I think that there are going to likely be some companies that are already making the decision to not file premium. I think October is going to be, in my mind, kind of a really big deal with respect to what we see with retrogression based upon the numbers that are going to be still in the 45 in the I-140Q. And if it gets a year more, I think most people are going to stop doing premium because I don't think there's going to be any benefit.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. And right now, Nanette, just to let you know that all the employers for Kinetics USA are still doing premium processing for the reasons that Mike has just outlined. And the same for our sister company, O'Grady Payton. I'm going to take a few more questions. Aka is asking Chris, can I go ahead and pay the fee bill?
Sure. Yeah. No. You can still go ahead and do that. Yeah. Yeah. You just won't progress through if you're past June 2022.
Okay.
In fact, like
Denise,
a lot of things, Tanya, like a lot of things, I think if you're given the option by the government to do these things, you should go ahead and do them. So, for instance, we've talked, for instance, here about the priority date being June of 2022. But actually, the visa fee bills through the National Visa Center are generally governed by a different chart, actually, which you can find on the Visa Bulletin website. And actually, the U.S. government, seem to be taking packet threes and fee bills as long as your priority date is till December of 2022. Now, I'm guessing they're probably being too optimistic with that, but it might be that they're even anticipating for October. So probably if your priority date is between June and December, you probably can move through the National Visa Center, at least part of that process.
Okay, so there you go, Aka. Go ahead and pay the fee bill. Gosh, we've got so many questions here, and I am trying to get through some of the questions that are maybe different to what we've discussed already. I have a question from Brian. Brian is asking, what if my employer abandons me? Denise, what would you say to Brian? I'll give my opinion after that, but maybe Denise, you can give yours.
I've been doing this for a very long time, and I have not seen an employer abandon an applicant who has had to wait through the retrogression process. However, with that said, I'm not the employer. I cannot control their policies and business operations. However, if you run into a situation where your employer has revoked or rescinded withdrawn the offer, if you've reached the I-140 stage and the I-140 is approved, again, you can preserve that priority date if you go to another employer. That other employer will file a new I-140 for you, let's say 6 months, 7 months down the line, and you can request, or they can request that original priority date be preserved. So it's as if they had filed the case when the original employer that you were with filed it. So for those of you who have an I-140 that has already been approved, if that's you, the person who's asking the question, I would not be concerned because your priority date is already locked. And unless there's misrepresentation or fraud, the I-140 stands.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. We are not seeing any employers in any way indicating that they would abandon cases. There's a massive shortage of nurses in the United States right now. And we've also been doing this for many, many years. And if for some reason that happened, we have many other employers would be very interested in sponsoring you. Okay, we're going to take one last question from the chat, and that is from Sol. How to recapture my old priority date, May 8th, 2008. Mike?
Yeah, so normally you need some proof of that old priority date. The easy answer is you have a copy of the old I-140 approval notice. However, there are a lot of other things that can be used. There's FOIA request where you can obtain that. But basically that process is done when you file a new I-140. So you file a new I-140 for your current employer. You show the old I-140 and then you approval notice that provides that priority date. And then you automatically, unless that priority date was revoked for fraud or misrepresentation, you own the rights to that priority date. So you will be assigned. Now, if you did not show your new employer the old priority date because you didn't think it was important, and now you're figuring out it is important, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to get them to recognize an old priority date if you've already filed your I-140 and already have an approval. You're likely going to have to try and convince the employer to simply file another new I-140 for you. That's going to likely be faster and cheaper and a more sure route than to simply try to get NVC to recognize an old priority date. We have limited success, and maybe Chris and Denise have better success, but limited success in getting them to recognize something that you just now presented. So I think the moral of that story is you need to let your recruiting company, Kinetics, and your employer be aware of all your prior immigration history, because even though you may think it's not relevant, it certainly would be relevant in this case, and generally speaking would be relevant all the time.
Thank you so much, Mike, for answering that question. And the good news is that you have a previous priority date. I know there are many people who wish they had a previous priority date that could be recaptured and would put them in a position where they can smoothly go through the process. Okay, so final words. Dr. Nurse Paul, what would you say to any nurse that's watching now, feeling despondent, feeling a bit down, feeling frustrated? What would your words of advice be?
Thank you, Tanya. As someone who survived retrogression, I had to wait almost 10 years to get to the United States. Abandoned by employer back in 2014 when I was already current. By the way, my priority is 2008. Abandoned by my employer in 2014. Got recaptured 2015. When I got recaptured, there was a retrogression again for several years back. Put me back another 2 years, almost 10 years to get here and live the American dream, the life that I wanted. Guys, do not stop with what you're doing. I have three key takeaways for you guys, for you nurses all over the world that are watching us today. The first one is continue with what you are doing, with the process that you are doing, whether it is filing I-140, whether it is getting documentary qualified, whether taking your IELTS, reviewing for the NCLEX, or doing your visa screen, or whatever processes your employers or your lawyers are requiring from you. Keep doing that. You want all of them in place for when the retrogression moves and it's time for you to be interviewed. You want all of them in place because the visa is numerically limited. Retrogression is a cycle. It happens. It will happen. It will keep happening. The first one that gets into the consul's desk with all their papers in gets to go to the United States first. Number two, do not make life-changing decisions until you have your visa. Don't sell your houses. A lot of people made this mistake. I've been an admin for 4 years. I've been a nurse here in the States for 6. I survived retrogression for 10 years. Heard people sold their houses, quit their jobs, or quit their kids' school, and then ending up having to have retrogression, and now they don't have visa because they're retrogressed for a year. Don't do that. Wait for your visa on your hand, and you have a flight to the United States before you make any life-changing decisions. And the last one is do something else while waiting. Go to Saudi, go to UK, go to Germany, stay in your country, and improve your nursing skills, get more competent, try another unit and try specialty units, but do something to improve your career. Once you get here, trust me, it will be worth it. If I quit, I would not have lived the American dream that I've always wanted when I was young. So that's it, guys. Thank you for having me in the show, Tanya. And by the way, Chris and Mike, I've been following your blogs since 2008 when I started my NCLEX. So thank you for that. But now we have Lefora, we have Kinetics, we have so many resources, free education, free shows like this. So guys, you are so lucky. This is only 1 year retrogression, but we're going to survive through this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I love that, Dr. Nurse Paul. That was wonderful final words, very inspiring. We are lucky, is Dr. Nurse Paul's final words, that this is only a retrogression that we're experiencing right now, nothing like what we experienced in 2008, 2009. Chris, your final words for anyone watching today?
God, I hate following something that was so well said. So I guess I'll just repeat myself, which is, this is obviously very frustrating, but really all it really does is just reset the timeline when you're coming to the United States, and it's not going to be years. Yes, it's more months than it probably should be. But the key thing, I think, from the nurse side is that you need to continue to do all of the things you're doing. And if anything, there's a little more pressure now, because you need to get into that queue so that when you do become current, your case can move quickly.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Denise?
I don't have much to add after Bob, but basically, just keep an eye on if you qualify to preserve your party date. Let your attorneys know so that they can walk you through the process and keep positive. And if you happen to have a spouse who has a separate process ongoing, maybe discuss that with your attorney, because you may qualify for a derivative visa classification that will allow you to enter the United States and work, such as if you're married to someone with an L1 or an E2. You can come in with an E2 derivative visa or an L2 derivative visa, which will allow you to work in the United States while you wait for your immigrant visa to become available. And then just to end it with, you have a great team here supporting you. Count on us to help you, and while you're waiting for your immigrant visa to become available. And just, again, don't lose hope and be proactive and have everything squared away before the visas become available.
Thank you, Denise. Final words, Mike?
Well, a couple of practical things, since Dr. Nurse Paul covered all the really important stuff, but a couple practical things, because the timing has changed. Maybe you want to reconsider your follow to join plan, and maybe you all want to come in together instead of having a follow to join. Maybe you have to look at the timing and say, should I renew my contract in the UAE or not? If you've got age out children that are coming close, you have to then look at that and say, what's my backup plan? Am I going to have to consider Canada, or what is my plan? Because as Chris said, and I think Chris's perspective on this is exactly right, what we really have to do is we simply have to change our expectation. This is no longer a 6 to 9 or 6 to 12 month process, an expectation of filing I-140 to arrival. It is now 12 to 18 months, or somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe 14 to 18 months. And that changes things. So as a result of that, there are practical decisions we might have to make in our lives relative to that change in timing.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for sharing, because those are things that if you've got families, different people have got different life circumstances. So really important to bear those things in mind as you're planning out what to do next as these new circumstances evolve. I want to take this opportunity to thank the panel for joining us today on the special edition of Onward and Upwards. As Dr. Nurse Paul said, I'm just so grateful that we have this team of expert lawyers who are here willing to come and share their time, share their wisdom, share their expertise. We all know that everyone hears that retrogression, that R word, that is terrifying, because I think many people have post-traumatic stress about retrogression in years before. So that I hope today was illuminating for many people to know that nothing has changed other than the timing. The process is the same. The American dream is still there for you, and we will get you to America. It's just a matter of a bit of more of a delay. And that really, I think, sums up hopefully the message for today. I also just wanted to add that we will very closely continue to monitor the situation. We will continue to answer questions, both on Onwards and Upwards, as well as within the Kinetics internal forums on all the questions that everybody has, so that hopefully you can feel more at ease, more knowledgeable. Knowledge is power. Don't panic. Let's just get through this together. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and onwards and upwards.
Thank you, everyone.
See you on
Thanks,
Friday.
Tanya.
Thank
See you guys.
you. Bye-bye.